For more than 16 years, hospitals across the United States trusted a quiet, polite, and seemingly compassionate nurse. Patients saw him as gentle. Families believed he cared. Doctors considered him reliable. No one imagined that behind his calm expression was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. His name was Charles Cullen, and he murdered patients in secret while pretending to save lives. To understand how this was possible, we must begin long before the hospital rooms, the investigations, and the headlines. Charles Cullen was born in 1960 in New Jersey, into a deeply troubled family. His childhood was marked by instability, neglect, and emotional trauma. His father died when Charles was still young. His mother struggled with severe mental health issues. Several of his siblings later died under tragic circumstances. From an early age, he was surrounded by loss. As a child, Charles was withdrawn and quiet. Teachers described him as shy and isolated. He had difficulty forming close friendships. He often appeared sad and distant. At home, there was little emotional support. He learned to keep his feelings hidden. During his teenage years, he began showing signs of depression. He attempted suicide multiple times. He struggled with self-worth and identity. He felt invisible. He felt unwanted. He felt disconnected from the world around him. Despite these struggles, Cullen was intelligent. He performed reasonably well in school and eventually decided to pursue a career in healthcare. He believed that working as a nurse would give him purpose. It would allow him to help people. It would give him a sense of value. In the early 1980s, he enrolled in nursing school. He completed his training and became a registered nurse. On paper, he was qualified. He had the necessary certifications. He passed the exams. He appeared competent. In 1987, he began working at his first hospital. To his coworkers, he seemed ideal. He was quiet. He followed rules. He volunteered for extra shifts. He rarely complained. Supervisors saw him as dependable. Patients saw him as kind. Families trusted him. No one suspected anything. But inside, something was deeply wrong. Cullen continued to battle severe depression. He felt empty. He felt disconnected. He developed dark fantasies. Over time, he began experiencing thoughts about death and control. According to later psychological evaluations, he developed a distorted belief that he was relieving suffering. In his mind, killing patients was not cruelty. It was mercy. His first known murder occurred in 1988. Working at a hospital in New Jersey, Cullen injected a patient with a lethal dose of medication. The death was classified as natural. No autopsy was performed. No investigation was launched. He had gotten away with murder. That moment changed everything. After realizing how easily he could kill without being detected, Cullen began repeating the behavior. He used medications such as insulin, digoxin, and epinephrine. These drugs, when administered improperly, can cause heart failure. They are difficult to detect in post-mortem examinations, especially in sick patients. He chose victims carefully. Elderly patients, critically ill patients, those already near death. Their deaths would not raise immediate suspicion. He would enter their rooms quietly, inject the medication, leave calmly. Minutes or hours later, alarms would sound. Nurses would rush in. Doctors would attempt resuscitation. Families would be notified. Another natural death. Over the years, Cullen moved from hospital to hospital, not because he was fired for murder, but because concerns were quietly raised. At several hospitals, administrators noticed unusual patterns. Patients under his care seemed to die more frequently. Some coworkers felt uneasy. Some supervisors questioned his behavior. But instead of reporting him to authorities, hospitals did something else. They let him resign. They gave neutral references. They protected themselves from lawsuits, and they sent him somewhere else. Each time this happened, Cullen found a new hospital. Each time, he gained access to new patients. Each time, the cycle continued. Between 1988 and 2003, Cullen worked at more than 10 hospitals and care facilities across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. At each location, patients died. At each location, suspicions were dismissed. At each location, warnings were ignored. Behind the scenes, Cullen's mental state deteriorated. He continued attempting suicide. He struggled with alcoholism. He experienced hallucinations. He isolated himself. Yet he maintained his professional image. He showed up to work. He followed procedures. He smiled politely. He became an expert at hiding in plain sight. Some co-workers later reported disturbing behavior. He sometimes turned off life support equipment. He tampered with medication records. He volunteered to care for the sickest patients. He seemed unusually interested in emergency situations. Still, no one imagined the truth. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this case is how many opportunities existed to stop him. At one hospital, a patient's family noticed that their loved one's death seemed suspicious. They raised concerns. The hospital conducted an internal review. Instead of contacting police, they settled privately and asked Cullen to resign. At another hospital, medication discrepancies were discovered. Records did not match inventories. Investigators questioned Cullen. He denied wrongdoing. He was allowed to leave. Again and again, he escaped accountability. By the late 1990s, Cullen had killed dozens of patients and no one knew. By the early 2000s, the pattern surrounding Charles Cullen had become impossible to ignore. At Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey, nurses began noticing something deeply disturbing. Patients who had been stable suddenly went into cardiac arrest. Medication records did not match what was stored in the pharmacy. Insulin and heart drugs were disappearing without explanation. One nurse in particular started paying closer attention. She noticed that many of the emergencies happened when Cullen was on duty. She saw him accessing medication cabinets at unusual hours. She observed his behavior becoming more erratic. Slowly, a terrifying realization began to form. This was not coincidence. In 2003, hospital administrators finally decided to act. They contacted local authorities and shared their concerns. Law enforcement launched a quiet investigation. Cullen was placed under surveillance. His computer usage, medication access, and work patterns were monitored. Investigators discovered that Cullen had been researching lethal drug dosages online. He had been reading about how to cause heart failure without detection. He had been studying how certain medications behaved in the body after death. The evidence was overwhelming. In December 2003, police arrested Charles Cullen. At first, he denied everything. He claimed he was innocent. He said he had only tried to help patients. He insisted he was being misunderstood. But investigators were patient. They built trust. They spoke calmly. They avoided confrontation. And slowly, Cullen began to talk. Over the course of multiple interviews, he confessed. He admitted to killing patients. Not one, not two, dozens. He described how he injected lethal doses of medication. He explained how he chose victims. He revealed which hospitals he had worked at. He detailed how he avoided detection. In some interviews, he appeared emotionally detached. In others, he cried. At times, he expressed guilt. At other times, he justified his actions. He repeated the same disturbing claim. He believed he was ending suffering. But experts strongly disagreed. Psychologists who evaluated Cullen concluded that he was deeply disturbed, suffering from severe depression, personality disorders, and pathological behavior. His actions were not acts of mercy. They were acts of control. He wanted power over life and death. He wanted to decide who lived and who died. As investigators reviewed hospital records, they began uncovering the true scale of the crimes. Patient after patient, hospital after hospital, year after year. Many deaths that had once been considered natural were now being reclassified as homicides. Autopsies were performed when possible. Medical records were re-examined. Families were contacted. Painful questions were reopened. How many victims were there? That question remains difficult to answer. Cullen confessed to killing at least 40 people. Some investigators believe the number may be over 100. Others estimate it could be even higher. Because many victims were elderly or seriously ill, and because records were incomplete, it is impossible to determine the exact total. What is certain is that he is one of the deadliest serial killers in American history. In 2006, Charles Cullen pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder. To avoid the death penalty, he cooperated fully with authorities. He provided detailed confessions and helped investigators close dozens of cold cases. He was sentenced to 18 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. In court, victims' families spoke about their pain. They described the shock of learning that their loved ones had been murdered by someone they trusted. Many expressed anger not only toward Cullen, but toward the hospitals that failed to stop him. Because the truth was devastating. Hospitals had known something was wrong. They had suspected him. They had questioned him. They had documented concerns. But they chose silence. They chose reputation over safety. They chose lawsuits avoidance over lives. By allowing Cullen to resign quietly and move on, they enabled his killing spree to continue. After the case became public, massive reforms were introduced. Hospitals strengthened background checks. Medication tracking systems were improved. Whistleblower protections were expanded. Reporting requirements were tightened. But for many families, these changes came too late. Their loved ones were already gone. The Cullen case forced the medical community to confront uncomfortable truths, that even trusted professionals can be predators, that systems designed to protect can fail. That silence can be deadly. Today, Charles Cullen remains imprisoned in New Jersey. He rarely speaks to the media. He lives in isolation. He will never be released. His life ended where his victims' lives ended, behind locked doors. But his story continues to haunt hospitals, regulators, and families across the country, because it shows how evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet man in a nurse's uniform. Sometimes it looks helpful. Sometimes it looks trustworthy, and that is what makes it so dangerous. He did not break into homes. He did not use weapons. He did not run from police. He walked into hospitals, and people welcomed him. The story of Charles Cullen is not only the story of a killer. It is the story of institutional failure, of ignored warnings, of misplaced trust, of lives lost because no one spoke loudly enough. It reminds us that authority must be questioned, that systems must be transparent, that safety must come before reputation, and that vigilance saves lives. And now the question remains, how many dangers are still hidden behind trusted uniforms? How many warnings are still being ignored today? If this story shocked you, subscribe to Voice Racks. Here we uncover real cases of crime, deception, and dark psychology that were never meant to be revealed. Leave your thoughts in the comments, because the next story might be even darker.